3 years after Muriel had stood in her own living room, pointed a finger at Dionne's pregnant belly, and told Harlan that baby couldn't possibly be his, she showed up outside Little Star's learning center trying to take the child home. Dionne's mother, Willette, had just buckled Ezra into his car seat when Muriel stepped out from behind a minivan. Willette recognized her immediately and didn't say a word. She just placed her body between the woman and the car door, steady as a wall. "I know that's Harlan's boy," Muriel said. Willette looked at her for a long moment. "You said he wasn't." Then she got in the car and drove away. She didn't call Dionne until they were 3 blocks from the house, because she didn't want Ezra to hear the way her voice shook. Dionne had grown up in the Eastwood section of Columbus, Ohio, in a 2-bedroom rental that always smelled like her mother's cooking and fabric softener. Willette had worked at a dry cleaning plant for 22 years, the kind of work that aged your hands fast and paid just enough to keep the lights on. She'd raised Dionne alone, after Dionne's father walked out when Dionne was 4, not with bitterness, but with a particular kind of quiet determination that Dionne had absorbed without realizing it. They ate dinner together every night at the kitchen table. Willette would ask about Dionne's day and actually listen to the answer. On cold mornings, she left Dionne's coat on the radiator so it would be warm when she put it on. Those were not small things. To Dionne, they were everything. By 24, Dionne was working as a medical billing specialist at a hospital system downtown. She wasn't rich, but she was careful with money and proud of what she'd built. She lived 20 minutes from her mother, close enough to check in, far enough to have her own life. She met Harlan at a mutual friend's birthday dinner. He was 31, worked in commercial real estate, wore a good watch without making a point of it. He was the kind of man who remembered what you'd ordered the last time and asked if you wanted the same thing. After 4 months of dating, Dionne had already told Willette she thought he might be the one. "Is he good to you?" Willette asked. "He really is, Mom. That's the only thing that matters." He proposed on a Sunday morning in October, over coffee at her kitchen table, with a ring he'd picked out himself. Dionne said yes before he'd finished the sentence. She was laughing and crying at the same time, and she couldn't have explained which was which. 2 weeks later, he took her to meet his mother. Muriel lived in a large house in Bexley, the kind of neighborhood where the lawns were cut by professionals and the cars in the driveway were never more than 3 years old. She'd been widowed 8 years earlier. Harlan's father had built a small but profitable property management company, and Muriel had spent the years since his death considering herself the guardian of whatever that legacy meant. She opened the front door before they knocked. "Harlan." She kissed him on the cheek and then looked at Dionne the way a person looks at a piece of furniture they're not sure will fit the room. "Mrs. Muriel, it's so nice to meet you." Dionne extended her hand. Muriel shook it briefly. "Come in." During dinner, she asked Dionne careful, polite questions that were actually something else. "Where did you say you grew up? And your father, is he still in the picture? What exactly does a medical biller do?" She smiled between each one. On the drive home, Harlan said he thought it went well. Dionne kept her thoughts to herself. She told Willette the next morning, sitting at Willette's kitchen table with her coffee going cold. "She's not going to like me." Willette turned from the stove. "Did she say something rude?" She was perfectly polite. Dionne wrapped both hands around her mug. That was the problem. They got married 7 months later. Muriel had opinions about everything, the flowers, the menu, the guest list, and she delivered those opinions as suggestions that somehow always became decisions. The wedding Dionne had imagined, simple and warm, gradually became something more formal, as though Muriel were proving a point Dionne couldn't quite identify. Harlan moved Dionne into his house, a 4-bedroom colonial he'd bought 3 years earlier. His mother had a key. That became clear the third day Dionne lived there, when she came home from work to find Muriel in the kitchen rearranging the cabinets. "I know where Harlan keeps things," Muriel said without turning around. "You'll learn." "I'm sure I will," Dionne said and hung up her coat. She didn't call Willette about it that night because she didn't want to worry her. She had believed, coming into this marriage, that patience was a kind of armor. She had believed that if she was kind enough and consistent enough, Muriel would eventually stop looking at her like a problem to be solved. She was wrong about that. Muriel had a way of making her disapproval known without ever saying anything outright. She would visit and praise Harlan's cooking even on nights Dionne had made the meal. She'd ask Harlan if he was getting enough sleep, loud enough for Dionne to hear, whenever they'd had a disagreement. Once, at a family gathering, she introduced Dionne to a cousin as Harlan's wife without using her name. And when Dionne supplied it herself, Muriel smiled and said, "Of course, yes, Dionne." Harlan noticed some of it. He didn't notice all of it. "She means well," he said more than once. "She just takes time to warm up." Dionne had heard that sentence enough times that she stopped responding to it. Greta arrived in March, 8 months into the marriage. She was Muriel's goddaughter, back in Columbus after 5 years in Atlanta. She was polished and well-dressed, and had the easy confidence of someone who'd never had to second-guess whether she belonged in a room. Muriel brought her to Sunday dinner without asking Harlan first, which was normal for Muriel. What wasn't normal was the way she watched Harlan and Greta talk, carefully, like someone watching a plan come together. "Greta practically grew up in this house," Muriel told Dionne afterward, while they were clearing the table. "She and Harlan have always had a connection." "That's nice," Dionne said. Muriel smiled. "It is." After that, Greta came around often. Muriel made sure of it. Invitations to dinners, a birthday party for a cousin, tickets to a charity event. Dionne watched it unfold with a clarity she didn't share with anyone, because saying it out loud would have made her sound paranoid, and she had no proof. Only the instinct of a woman who had learned to pay attention to the things that happened around her. She called Willette one evening, while Harlan was at a work event. "Mom, do you trust your gut when it's telling you something?" "Baby," Willette said, "my gut has never lied to me in 61 years. By April, Dionne had missed her period twice. She took 3 tests to be sure, and then she sat on the bathroom floor for a few minutes just breathing before she let herself feel happy about it. She called Willette first. Then she made Harlan's favorite dinner and told him over the meal. He looked at her for a moment like he was processing it. Then his face broke into a real smile, the unguarded kind she'd fallen in love with. "We're having a baby? We're having a baby." He came around the table and held her, and she let herself believe that this was the thing that would change everything, that would make the house feel finally like hers, that would give her and Muriel some common ground. She should have known Muriel didn't see it that way. Muriel's reaction when Harlan told her was measured. She offered congratulations that sounded like condolences. In the weeks that followed, she made comments about Dionne's diet, her work hours, her stress levels. Once, she told Harlan he needed to make sure Dionne wasn't pushing herself, as though Dionne were a liability that needed managing rather than a woman carrying his child. Then came the night Dionne found out what Muriel had actually been planning. It was a Thursday. Harlan was traveling for work, 2 days in Cincinnati for a property acquisition. Dionne had gotten home late, heated up leftovers, gone to bed early. She woke around 11 to the sound of voices downstairs. She came down in the dark and found Greta in her kitchen, sitting at her table with a glass of wine that had come from Dionne's refrigerator. "Greta," Dionne kept her voice level. "What are you doing here?" Greta set the glass down. "Muriel said it was fine. She said you wouldn't mind." "Muriel doesn't live here." There was a long silence. Then Greta said, "I should probably go." She did. But she left the wineglass on the table, and Dionne sat there looking at it for a long time after the front door closed. She didn't tell Harlan when he called that night. She wasn't sure yet how to explain the feeling in her chest, less like anger and more like recognition. The slow, sick understanding that something had already been set in motion. She found out what it was 2 weeks later. Harlan came home from what he'd said was a late meeting. He was quieter than usual at dinner. Dionne asked if everything was okay. He said he was tired. The next morning, she found him sitting at the kitchen table with his phone face down and his jaw set. "Who told you?" she asked before he could say anything. He looked at her. "Does it matter?" It mattered enormously, but she already knew. He told her what he'd supposedly seen, a photograph of Dionne at a restaurant with a man, sitting close, the kind of image that looks like one thing and can only be explained as another, if you're given full context nobody had bothered to provide. Muriel had forwarded it to him. Greta had taken it. The man in the photo was Dionne's colleague from the billing department, a married man she'd had lunch with. Twice, while reviewing an insurance audit. She explained all of this. She was calm and precise. She named the colleague, named the audit, named the dates. Harlan listened. Then he said he needed time to think. "Harlan," she reached across the table, "I am pregnant with your child. I have not lied to you once in 2 years. Look at me." He looked at her. Something in his face shifted. She thought for a moment it was going to break open into the truth. But then Muriel's voice came from the front door, which she'd let herself into, and the moment closed. What happened in the next hour was something Dionne did not talk about for a long time afterward. She talked about it eventually, with a counselor, and once with Willette, late at night at the kitchen table when Ezra was asleep. The short version was this. Muriel came in with Greta behind her, and said things designed to be believed, and Harlan, who had been raised by that woman, and loved her in the particular helpless way children love the parents who shaped them, chose to believe them. He told Dionne to get out of his house. She was 4 months pregnant. She stood in the driveway with a bag she had packed herself because no one else was going to pack it for her, and she called Willette. Willette answered on the second ring. "Come home, baby," Willette said without Dionne having to explain a single thing. "Just come home." Ezra was born on a Tuesday in December, just after 6 in the morning, 7 pounds and 2 ounces, with his father's ears and his grandmother Willette's mouth. Dionne held him and looked at his face and thought, whatever came before this moment and whatever comes after, I will protect you from everything I can, and love you through everything I can't. Willette stood at the foot of the bed and cried without making a sound. "He's perfect," she said. "He really is, Mom." The months after Ezra's birth were not easy, and Dionne didn't pretend they were. She was on maternity leave from a job she'd been afraid she might lose. She was sleeping in her old bedroom at her mother's house, which was too small and too far from everything and exactly where she needed to be. She filed the divorce papers herself with a lawyer she found through a community legal clinic. Harlan did not contest it. Muriel did not contact her. She heard through mutual connections that Harlan was seeing Greta. She heard later that they were engaged. She let herself feel whatever she felt about that for about 3 days, and then she put it somewhere she didn't have to look at. She kept working. She kept saving. She started looking at apartments. She took Ezra to the park on Saturday mornings and let Willette hold him as long as she wanted, which was always longer than Willette admitted she needed. Silas came into her life sideways, the way good things often do. He was a pediatrician at the practice Dionne chose for Ezra's 4-month checkup. Careful in the way that doctors who actually like children are careful, as opposed to the ones who are just competent. He asked Ezra questions as though Ezra might answer, and Ezra stared at him with total seriousness and then grabbed his stethoscope. "Strong grip," Silas said. "He gets it from his grandmother," Dionne said. She thought about that appointment longer than made sense. She told herself it was just gratitude, because he'd been thorough and kind. She told Willette he was nice. Willette asked what he looked like. Dionne said she hadn't really noticed. Willette didn't say anything. She just looked at Dionne in that way she had. Over the next several months, Silas became a quiet presence at the edges of Dionne's life. They crossed paths at the library one Saturday, both reaching for the same book in the new releases section. He asked if she'd read the author before. She had. They stood in that aisle for 45 minutes, talking about nothing that mattered and everything that did. And she left without checking anything out. He asked her to dinner the following week, carefully, the way a person asks when they mean it and are afraid of the answer. She said yes the way she hadn't said yes to anything in a long time. While Dionne was learning to trust someone again slowly and without rushing it, Harlan's marriage to Greta was becoming what it was always going to be. Greta had debts she hadn't mentioned, a gambling habit she'd kept quiet, a network of people she owed money to, and a talent for moving funds in ways that looked like household management until you looked more closely. Muriel had given her access to a household account in the first months of the marriage to cover expenses, and by the time she noticed the statements, Greta had moved $42,000 through it for reasons that had nothing to do with their household. The marriage lasted 10 months. Muriel paid someone to confirm what she'd suspected, then confronted Greta in Harlan's driveway on a Wednesday afternoon. Greta denied everything calmly, and then 3 days later, cleared out the lockbox in Harlan's home office and disappeared. She left a voice message on his phone, 40-something seconds long, which he listened to twice before he drove to his mother's house and sat at her kitchen table without saying anything for a very long time. Muriel, for the first time in Dionne's memory, had nothing to say either. She had lost the savings she'd transferred into Harlan's account to cover the mortgage during a slow quarter. She had lost the confidence she'd carried for years like a second skin, and somewhere in the silence of that kitchen, she had begun to understand what she had done. not just to Greta, but to the woman before her. She had seen Ezra by then. She had spotted him at a neighborhood event, across a park lawn, perched on Willette's hip, laughing at something a dog was doing near the fence. She'd watched him, for several minutes from a distance, before Willette looked up and met her eyes and turned away. She'd seen his face clearly enough. She knew. Muriel didn't wait long after that. She found out which preschool Ezra attended, a small program near Willette's house, and she showed up during afternoon pickup one Tuesday, spoke to his teacher, introduced herself as his grandmother, and asked if she could take him home early for his mother. The teacher called Dionne first. Dionne left work in the middle of a billing reconciliation and drove there in 11 minutes. She found Muriel standing outside the classroom door, dressed well, spine straight, expression composed. Everything about her looked like a woman who had rights. Dionne knew better. "You need to leave," Dionne said. Her voice was even. She had rehearsed this moment without meaning to in the back of her mind for 3 years. Muriel looked at her. "He's my grandson. You told Harlan that baby couldn't be his. Those were your exact words." "I was wrong." "Yes, you were." The silence between them held. Muriel's composure shifted slightly, something giving way at the corners, and Dionne recognized what it was. Not remorse exactly, need. Muriel had always arranged people around what she needed, and now the thing she needed was the only grandchild she was ever going to have. "I'd like to be a part of his life," Muriel said. "No." The word landed and sat there. "Dionne, you stood in my home with that woman and told my husband my child wasn't his. He believed you because you're his mother and he trusted you. And then he put me out in the driveway." Dionne's voice stayed level. "I was 4 months pregnant. It was January. I was standing outside in January with a bag I packed myself." She paused. "You don't get to come to his school and introduce yourself to his teacher. You don't get to decide you want him now because it's convenient for you. Ezra has a mother and a grandmother, and they have been present every single day since before he was born. You were not." Muriel's eyes went wet. Whether it was grief or shame or something else, Dionne had decided it didn't matter. She walked past her into the classroom. She spoke to the teacher quietly without drama. The woman outside was not to be given access to Ezra under any circumstances. "I understand completely," the teacher said. Dionne picked up Ezra, who grabbed a fistful of her collar and said, "Mama," with the full seriousness of a person delivering important news. She kissed his forehead and breathed in the warm smell of him. Sunscreen and crayon, and something that was just his. "I know, baby," she said. "Let's go see Grandma Willette." Harlan found out the truth from Greta herself. From that voice message he'd been avoiding fully processing. He listened to it again one night. Alone in his kitchen, the part where Greta, without any particular remorse, mentioned Muriel, mentioned the photograph, mentioned the plan with the flat matter-of-factness of someone who no longer had anything to protect. He sat with that for a long time. Then he drove to his mother's house and confronted her directly, and Muriel, because there was nothing left to hide behind, confirmed it. He did not call Dionne. She had expected that too. There was nothing he could have said that would have changed the shape of the 3 years that had already happened. The nights she'd been too exhausted to cry. The first time Ezra got a fever, and she'd handled it alone at 2 in the morning. The divorce papers she'd walked into the courthouse to file by herself on a gray November morning while Willette watched Ezra at home. Those years existed. An apology didn't reach them. Silas proposed in April at Dionne's kitchen table. Her own table, in her own apartment, the 2-bedroom she'd moved into the previous spring in a neighborhood she'd chosen herself, with a yard Ezra could run in and a kitchen window that caught good morning light. Silas had brought Ezra a toy truck beforehand and sat on the floor with him for 20 minutes while Dionne made tea, and by the time she sat down, Ezra had fallen asleep halfway on Silas's knee. He asked her quietly, the way he did most things. She looked at him, at the careful, steady way he was watching her, and thought about everything she had believed marriage would be, and everything it had turned out to be instead. And how this felt nothing like fear. It felt like something she'd built toward without fully knowing she was building. "Yes," she said, "absolutely yes." Ezra woke up during the hug and looked at both of them like they were being extremely loud for no reason, which made them laugh so hard the tea went cold. Willette cried when Dionne called her that evening, quickly, the way she cried, without making a production of it. "He's a good man?" "Mom, he genuinely is." then I'm happy. That is all I have ever wanted." After she hung up, Dionne stood in her kitchen for a while and looked at the morning light already coming through the window for tomorrow. The way light does in a home you've made for yourself. From the next room, she could hear Ezra talking to his toys, full sentences addressed to a plastic dinosaur, explaining something very important. She had not waited for Harlan to believe her. She had not waited for Muriel to apologize. She had not needed either of those things to get here. The faucet in the bathroom still dripped, and Ezra still woke up twice a week convinced he'd heard something. And her savings account was not where she wanted it yet. None of it had stopped her. None of it had even slowed her down much. She was 30 years old, and she hadn't been starting over. She had been continuing every single day the whole time. She'd just been too busy moving forward to notice how far she'd come.